Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to another In Session Film YouTube live discussion. I'm JD Duran. Joining me, as always, for these discussions is the great Richard Newby. Richard, thanks for joining me once again, my friend.
Hey, JD, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We always love you here. Obviously, we are here to talk about Hawkeye. You've come back for every single one of these Marvel shows. It's been a treat. It's been one of the best things of the year having these conversations. Hawkeye, admittedly, was one of those shows, or one of the announcements, I should say, when Marvel made the announcement, hey, we're doing a Hawkeye series. Initially, I was a little... okay, why are we doing this? I wasn't sure what the purpose was, but for reasons we'll get into, I think they definitely made, they answered that question. They answered my question.
Yeah, it was definitely on the near the bottom of my hype list.
Yeah, absolutely. But for reasons we'll get into, I think they more than delivered with this. It's still not my favorite of the year. We can get to the rankings and all that at the end. Let's first start off with overall thoughts. We noted right before we got recording here, Richard, that this was directed by Bert and Birdie, two female directors, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
And of course, Jeremy Renner back as Hawkeye, Haley Steinfeld as Kate Bishop / Hawkeye. Is also here as well. A couple of cameos throughout the little series here, which is fascinating as well. Vera Farmiga has a big role. Yeah. So give it to me, Richard. What are your overall thoughts on Hawkeye?
I thought it was a really fun series. It definitely didn't have the same emotional impact for me as some of the other shows, but as just kind of like a nice little kind of buddy series set during the holidays. I thought it was a really good time. I thought the characters were fun, particularly Haley Steinfeld's Kate Bishop. I thought that she was a really nice addition to the MCU. I think that her personality is so apparent and so strong that, it really felt like we were getting kind of a new flavor in the MCU. And then also it was nice to see Jeremy Renner get a chance to dig into Clint Barton more. Because he's been in so many MCU movies, but we really, haven't gotten to spend that much time with him. He's always been kind of supporting and sidelined. And I think this series kind of really answered not only why people would kind of be inspired by a guy who shoots bows and arrows, but also kind of look at how he sees himself as a tool and as a weapon, and kind of trying to break free from that.
Yes.
And, I think overall the series kind of reminded me of the Netflix shows, interestingly enough, in terms of kind of the pacings of the show and, this larger cast of characters and kind of the overall mystery of it. I think it definitely benefited more from being 6 episodes rather than the Netflix 13. But I definitely got some of that similar kind of vibe from the series. Yeah.
So I quite loved this series. Let me tell you why, Richard. So earlier in the year, we talked about WandaVision, right?
Yeah.
That was a lot. There was a lot to that.
For sure.
Right. Emotionally, thematically. Then you get to Loki. Oh my God. A brain buster. There is so much going on in that show. With characters and thieves, things they reveal at the end. How is that the multiverse? That's a lot to take in.
For sure.
What I love about Hawkeye is its simplicity. After everything to unpack with those two, and obviously coming off the heels of Endgame with Hawkeye, I love the earnestness and the sincerity of this show. And its simplicity. This is a fun Marvel event that's more or less a Christmas event, right? This is a Christmas show, a Christmas movie, however you want to label it. I love the Christmassy aesthetic.
Yeah,
that was nice. All really great. And it's it takes a step back to breathe a little bit after the complexities of the first two. So I kind of love that it doesn't quite have as much packed into it, if that makes sense, like thematically or even in terms of characterization. It's a little bit more streamlined, which I kind of appreciate. Now, it certainly doesn't, that means it doesn't quite have the depth of the previous two, for sure. I agree. But in this case, and maybe this is just selfishly on my part, because there was so much to analyze and think about those other two shows, that to just kind of take a breather, but also have fun. And there's also some great stuff going on here emotionally for me as well that I really liked. And I think the emotion of this series, why I think, at least for me, it's as much emotionally fulfilling as the other two, comes down to Jeremy Renner. And as you're talking about, he's mostly kind of been in the background, having fun with ScarJo and everything, all the adventures they get into. But what we know about Renner is that he's a great actor.
Yeah.
He's a really great actor. And now he's at the top of the billing list. He's the lead here, and he has a lot to chew on. And his performance is so good. It is so ridiculously good that he brings the emotion. And there are a couple of scenes in particular that stand out to me. That phone call he has with his son. Oh yeah. My God. There might not be tears on the page, but his performance there is incredible. When his son is like, "Oh, if you can't be home for Christmas, it's okay." And the heartbreak on his face that is Renner. That's not necessarily what's there on the page. He's great. And then the other thing I love about this show, and this is where I think it's at its most meaty as well, but Renner's a big part of this. One of the bigger criticisms at the end of Endgame is this whole idea of what about Black Widow? Like, Tony Stark gets this huge send off, which is great, by the way. But what about ScarJo? What about her? Now we get to see her in her movie, and her movie is kind of her send off from the MCU.
Yeah.
But I think they somewhat remedy that, at least for me. Obviously, Black Widow still doesn't get like her big farewell funeral or anything, but like what we talked about earlier in the year with WandaVision, her grieving after the events of Endgame, we get to see Hawkeye do the same thing.
Yeah.
We get to see Hawkeye recoil in his grief and his survivor's guilt. The fact that he just simply lost a best friend. That is the beating heart of this series, I think. Haley Steinfeld is great. She brings a fun element. Kate Bishop is a ton of fun. But the beating heart of it is Hawkeye reflecting back on his choices, the fact that Black Widow was gone, Natasha's gone, and him wrestling with that very directly, because obviously from a plot standpoint, so much of what's happening around Hawkeye here is the ramifications of him going off and doing things during the blip when everyone was gone, and he was just angry and bitter and all that sort of stuff. So he's forced to confront a lot of these emotions, and Renner makes it pay off. His performance is so good. That moment of him there at the statue talking to Natasha.
That was great. Yeah, that was great.
Incredible. That is a gut punch. So on the whole, I agree with you. It doesn't have as many layers as the other Marvel shows, but I think that's a good thing here. And where it does have its layers, when it's Hawkeye reflecting on his relationship with Natasha, it's really, really great, I think.
Yeah, I'm a big themes guy, as you know. Like, I love the
same.
Complicated.
Yeah. No, I get it. I'm there as well. I'm with you. Yeah.
I love the complicated mythology of WandaVision and Loki and all that.
Yeah,
peeling
for sure.
back the kind of social layers of Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Falcon and Winter Soldier has a lot of that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did think that this was like kind of a nice change of pace, particularly since it's leading up to around the same time that No Way Home is coming out, and there's a lot to unpack there. Of course.
Yeah.
So I did appreciate the kind of simplicity of it, as you said, despite it not hitting me in the same way as the previous shows did.
Fair, yeah.
But yeah, I think that there's so many great character moments in the series. It does kind of work as a post mortem, as a kind of funeral for Black Widow as much as it is a Hawkeye show, which I
Yeah.
think is really neat. And I think that it pulls a lot from Matt Fraction's Hawkeye run, and then Kelly Thompson's Kate Bishop run as well, which are both really
Mhm.
grounded and character focused. So I really appreciated that um, as well. The other shows I think that we've seen, they're more so kind of pulling from everywhere, a bunch of different, influences of not series that all came out at the
Mhm.
same time, and, not all characters that appeared together. But I think with Hawkeye, you know, it's more so pulling directly from Matt Fraction and Kelly Thompson's work, which I think is really interesting as well.
Yeah, I really liked all of that as well. I don't. Admittedly, I'm not as in tune with those specific comic runs. Was very aware of some of the parallels because of smart people like Richard that are out there tying these strings together for me. But I did like how all of that comes together. I do think, from a writing standpoint, everything is streamlined very well, even if it's maybe a little bit easier to guess the foreshadowing comparatively to the other shows.
For sure.
I think really the biggest question was, are they going to do it? Is Marvel going to pull the trigger? Because we were kind of all assuming that this is leading to who we think it is, right?
Yeah.
It has to be.
Yeah.
and there were rumors that actors were going to be reprising some of their roles. So we weren't really sure, but it did seem to suggest that it was kind of heading that way. And it's certainly I think the writing of the show does a great job of kind of laying the breadcrumbs. This was going to happen. It's maybe a little things come together a little quickly. The pacing is maybe a little bit uneven in that regard, but
Sure.
this being a 6-episode run,
Yeah.
I was certainly okay with it. I'm willing to go with it, especially because of how fun it is, the aesthetics of it, and not just aesthetically. I love how the score implements all of these Christmas cues
It's
as well.
pretty awesome. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
great. Like just musically, it was just really fun as well. The performances, as we've been talking about. So yeah, I do like the how it certainly ties to the comics, how it's influenced in that regard, and just again the simplicity of it simply works for me. I think that allows these actors to really kind of be the star of this show. And Renner is great, but Haley Steinfeld as well. Man, she's just having a ball. Like
Yeah.
she's just having so much fun, and I couldn't help but be captivated by it.
Yeah, and I think it's so fascinating too. I don't know if you read this interview or not, but Feige was saying that there was no open audition for an actress for Kate Bishop. Like, it was always Haley Steinfeld, and they sent the
Makes
offer to
sense.
her, and she
Sure.
never had to audition. And I just think that that's really neat because she embodies the character, so well. Particularly for people who have
Mhm.
read the comics, you know, she is a kind of action first, think later,
Yeah,
sometimes kind of annoying and overbearing, but well-intentioned character. And I feel like she navigates that so well.
that's the character. Yeah, in the
Yeah, yeah,
show
she
for sure.
navigates that so well by making her like immensely likable, despite those flaws that I feel like in another actor's hands could make her somewhat grating.
Yeah,
And I just feel like the way
yeah.
that she works off of Renner is so interesting too,
Oh,
because
yeah,
I don't even think that it's necessarily that Renner's a straight man, because I think that he's actually really funny in this show. It's just that their
yeah,
sense of humor is so different, and he's very much kind of the older, grumpier
yeah.
partner
Yeah, a
who's
little
been through
grizzled.
the ringer,
Yeah, yeah,
and she's coming in this wide-eyed
yeah,
and fresh and overly optimistic about what it means to be a superhero. So I kind of love that kind of
yeah.
older experience versus the newcomer coming in, and that's just really fun
Oh yeah.
to play
No,
off
yeah,
of. Yeah.
yeah. It's a great dynamic for sure. The youthful vigor
Yeah.
that Kate has, that Steinfeld is so great at tapping into. Like, she has this innocence to her. She's so ready to jump into the action, regardless of the consequences. Damn the consequences.
Yeah.
Let's just do it. You
Yeah.
know, and Renner, who has, you know, I mean, he's coming right off the heels of defeating Thanos.
Yeah.
After losing to Thanos, then defeating Thanos, and everything that went into all of that, now he's forced into this conflict. You know, this is a guy that has been through a lot. And as we've been talking about emotionally, he's certainly struggling through a lot of this series, which Renner is so great at. So it makes that dynamic, the fact that he's certainly a little tired. He's dealing with hearing problems because of getting older and all the action that he's been through in his career, that to have all of this youthful energy around him, of course he's going to react the way he does. But at the same time, showcasing a lot of empathy. I think that's what's so fascinating about Clint Barton, is that it would have been so easy for him. And, you know, to be fair, he does a couple of times try to get rid of her, like, go home. Please go home, stay out of this. And then eventually kind of, you know, letting her, like, he kind of relents, lets her come into the fold a little bit, and always shows empathy to her. And, you know, I think that says a lot about him as well. And, you know, that emotional vulnerability that we've been talking about, and just adds more layers to that for me, which is really great. But yeah, I mean, it's such a fascinating duality between those two. It certainly makes for a fun time.
And I think, you know, in terms of the sending Kate home thing, I thought there were some really interesting kind of layers to that, in terms of, you know, how Clint talks about being used as a weapon, right? He's just a weapon pointed by the right people, you know, at the right targets. And there's this kind of, you know, question of what happens when you're pointed at the wrong people, you know, by the wrong person. And I think that we kind of see that tie-in with Yelena later on in the season. But I think that Clint is very careful about making sure that Kate isn't just a tool for him in this kind of quest to clear his name and get rid of the burden of the Ronin. You know, I think there's a lot of history there that's kind of not spoken about, but just, you know, from what we've learned in the MCU about SHIELD, you know, and how they're not really like the kind of upfront, you know, standing global agency, right? They've got some shady stuff. You know, and we even see that, you know, a little bit with Black Widow, you know, and his story about how he was sent to kill her and his choice not to, you know. So I think that there's some real interesting, you know, unspoken history there that Renner just kind of provides through the way he says the dialogue or through the look on his face, you know, where there is a sense that, you know, this job has come with a cost and he's not always what he's wanted to do. And so I think, you know, I think that the show makes a clear distinction that, you know, for Clint, Hawkeye began as an agent, as an assassin, whereas Kate Bishop sees that role as being a superhero. And so I think because of her viewpoint, she's able to, you know, come to that role a little more optimistically.
Yeah, she certainly comes into it with a little bit more innocence. And it's interesting you're talking about how he views this job with a little bit of trepidation, because he feels as if he's been used as a tool. And in many respects, he has. And I love how that juxtaposes Kate. And as you're talking about, she looks at it more optimistically, more as an Avenger. And it creates this fascinating duality of him and how he views the role as perhaps being a tool of service for some sort of bigger picture, whether that's right or wrong.
Yeah.
And Kate has a more individual perspective on it, which is what I think I love so much about the costuming through line, like that comedic gag throughout the film, because it does reverberate that idea of her and of her optimism, how she looks at this and the individuality that she wants to bring to it. And I think that's ultimately why Hawkeye relents to the whole costume thing at the end, as much as it begrudges him, because he doesn't want to be a tool for any larger service because of how that can go wrong in many ways. And as you pointed out a second ago as well, which is so important, he doesn't want her to be that either for him in all of this as well, which is so important. And I think that's a big part of why he relents and puts on the costume and maybe tries to have a little bit of fun with that as well, or at least, have some sort of coercion with her, have some partnership with her, so that way she doesn't feel like she's being used or manipulated. She's a part of it. She's a partner. This is what she wants. I can do this for her. And that does mean a lot to her. That does mean a lot to Kate. And just by him wearing that costume, it maintains that level of optimism. And for Clint, that optimism could go a long way in terms of just keeping her alive.
Yeah, it's transformative too. Like, I think there's a transformative power in costume choices. I mean, that goes back to the whole idea of Ronin, right? He's putting on
exactly
this costume to become, this
create
darker
fear and
version of himself, right? And so I think that in the end, to be able to put on that purple costume, is him, finally putting to bed the Ronin part.
Yeah, bring some closure. Yeah. Oh man, and I love me some closure. I know we joked about this a little bit when you were on to talk Spider-Man, but it's one of my favorite themes. I think there's a lot of power to closure. And ultimately, that's what Clint is seeking throughout all of this, right? He wants to put the whole Ronin thing to bed.
Yeah.
And to do that, symbolically, part of that process is putting on this costume. Even if he doesn't want to, he does it. And of course, you get the barbecue at the end.
Yeah.
And those final scenes, another gesture there to bring closure to all of it as well. But I do love how you get that in the show, and not just in terms of some of these symbolic gestures, but emotionally speaking as well. I think that's why he goes to the memorial there, the New York Memorial, has his conversation with Natasha to offer up a little, to bring some healing to him as well, because he knows that he's going to have to do some things that, maybe he'll regret, or maybe, she wouldn't like, but it's something he feels he has to do. Now, the great irony, I think there's a lot of awesome irony in that scene, because he walks away thinking that he's going to have to do something. But in the end, I think a lot of that is undermined because of his relationship with Kate and where that goes, and how she fills this massive hole in his heart, this massive gap, this chasm that is left there by her death. She fills that unexpectedly. I don't think that was something that he planned on.
No.
And so by the end, emotionally, he gets a lot of closure as well. And it works great irony that Natasha can now rest at peace because Clint didn't have to do the things that he thought he was going to have to do.
And I think, to go along with that, it's so interesting, just to get into the adversaries a little bit, with Maya Lopez, who was actually introduced in a Daredevil storyline called Parts of a Whole, by David Mack and Joe Quesada. And so, we're talking about the holes that exist within these people that they're trying to fill. And I think you see that very much with Maya and with Yelena, right? This part of them is missing, and they don't have a Kate Bishop to kind of, fill that empty part of them. And so I think as much as we're seeing kind of Clint Barton get closure, we're seeing, Maya and Yelena try to figure out, who they're going to become with this missing part of them. What does that lead them to?
No, that's a really great point. And again, going back to some of the emotional fulfillment of me, I mean, that whole backstory on Maya, I forget what episode that was, 2 or 3. That was very moving. I really like that a lot. And, we saw a lot of Yelena, obviously, and Black Widow, and to see her come back into the fold as well. And you're right that both of them are also seeking closure in their own way as it relates to Hawkeye, or the Ronin, as that's who Maya is after in all of this, not knowing that it's Hawkeye. But both of them are after Hawkeye, seeking that revenge. And I mean, we've certainly seen this in a lot of the Marvel content already as it relates to revenge and how that, only makes things worse.
Yeah.
But I love how instead of, I guess with Maya, you do kind of get that through line by the end. And we can talk about that a little bit because I do think my biggest criticism is kind of the how some of that is written with the Maya character as some of this goes. But as it relates to this specific topic that we're talking about now, I do find that interesting though, especially as it relates back to Hawkeye because obviously he did a lot of things as the run-in he very much regrets, and there's going to be a lot of fallout. He knows that, and we're getting to see that up close with the Maya character. I think from her perspective, I really like that. It's some of the things around her I have some issue with. But with Yelena, I love how all of that is tethered into here as well
Yeah.
because she doesn't really know the truth. All she knows is that her sister's gone and now she's pissed
Yeah.
and she wants to do something about it. And that whole confrontation at the end, I think is utterly fascinating.
And
And oh,
it's
go
such
ahead, go ahead.
it's such raw emotion from her
Yeah,
in that scene
yeah,
too. And I think one of the things that I love about that is that even though, she doesn't kill Clint at the end, like it's not like they're buddy buddy at the end. Like it's not like a
yeah,
welcome to the
yeah,
Avengers or the
yeah,
new Black Widow thing. Like there's still this like, you know,
yeah,
this distance between the two characters, this kind of fraught relationship, this idea that, you could have done more, which I feel like, that weighs heavily on Clint's consciousness as well. But I think that when you bring in Yelena, who, has such a difficulty trusting because of what she's been through, I like the
mhm.
fact that, the series, doesn't go that extra step and just like, completely resolve everything and say, all right, well, she's going to be like a fully heroic character. I think she's still
Yeah,
conflicted and she walks away conflicted as well.
yeah, absolutely. And at first, she doesn't even want to hear the truth.
Yeah.
Like she hears it, doesn't believe it, and just kind of passes it on, which is what's so fascinating about the whole whistle moment, because that's something intimate. That's something very specific
Mm.
that would have gotten her attention. And it kind of reminded me of what we talked about with WandaVision, that whole vision versus vision moment
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
it starts off as a little bit of a fight, but then the whole thing breaks down into this philosophical
Yeah.
discussion. It kind of reminded me of that in the sense that yes, there's some physicality, there's a little bit of fighting, but really it comes down to this intimate conversation the two are having there where Hawkeye is trying to tell her the truth. And it's eating at him that he's having to regurgitate again what had
Yeah.
happened. Something that's obviously been eating him. We saw it in Endgame. It continues here in some great ways. And then he's saying all of this, and it takes something intimate for Yelena to respond to it, which I just find really, really fascinating how all of that comes together. That it's a little bit of a fight, but it's mostly this conversation. It's mostly the two of them sharing a moment. That's how all of that crystallizes for them. And I don't know, maybe it's because we've, we I just love how Marvel sometimes it becomes more about character and theme
For
than it
sure.
does the fighting. And I love the fighting. Man, we talked about that a lot in Spider-Man
Yeah.
and the Avengers movies. You get so much of it there. And there's some great action here as well in this
Yeah.
series. But I love that moment wasn't about the fight, not the physical fight. It was
Right.
more about this emotional, psychological uh little sparring match that they had
Yeah.
there. And I thought it was all brilliant the way it plays out.
And I think that's one of the reasons why Marvel Studios attracts such great actors. I mean, you got,
Yeah, for
really
sure.
this beautifully written dialogue scene between Florence Pugh and Jeremy Renner. I mean, two
Hmm.
Oscar nominated actors just like, having this dialogue, and you can strip away,
Hmm.
the costumes and the Christmas setting and the, the fact that these are, comic book characters, and you really have this really gripping and grounded emotional scene between the two.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, without these performances on the page, like that, it could veer into schmaltz very quickly,
Yeah.
or too much sentiment. Borderline be tacky depending on the performance, but they certainly ground that emotion very well. I agree with you. That has really been the magic trick through all of the MCU, is getting these really talented actors,
Yeah.
and not only just getting them, but getting genuine performances out of them. They're no one's ever phoning it in. Like
Yeah.
they're doing great work, and it certainly makes that moment come alive very well. Let's talk a little bit more about the Maya character.
Sure.
Now, obviously, we get that moment at the end, and we do need to talk about the big cameo. But circling back to Maya real fast. So I like the writing of that character. Now, she has a relationship with Kazi, I believe the character's name is.
Yeah.
I don't know if that is handled wonderfully. I think the way that crystallizes is a little messy and a little uneven. And that's maybe my biggest, like, a lot of that doesn't make sense to me, and it feels a little shoehorned. So I don't love that. What we get at the end could be interesting, maybe a little conventional in terms of revenge, but I think, at least, you're certainly the comic book expert. You can tell me if I'm full of, crap here, but from what I know, what I'm assuming is that what it foreshadows is not exactly what happens. She does get her revenge, but I don't think there's a death there involved. You can get to that here in a moment. So she does kind of follow through on the revenge element. And given the emotion of the character, I think for the show to go there kind of makes sense. I just don't love how her relationship with Kazi kind of finishes. It's endearing enough up until the end. I do think it's a little messy getting there, or in terms of wrapping it up, though.
Yeah, I love the way that Alaqua Cox, plays Maya, and I really like the actor who plays Kazi. I can't remember his name at the moment, but for me, I wasn't aware that there was like a romantic investment in that relationship until like way late in the season. And so,
Okay.
in those final moments where Kazi's kind of talking about like, this isn't the life that I wanted for you. This was my life, and I you
Yeah.
followed me into it. Like I didn't really see those threads being lined up, earlier. So I think that came, a little quickly. And
Yeah.
also, what's interesting about the Kazi character is that, so in the comics, he's a completely different character. He does work for the tracksuit mafia, but he's a character called the Mime, and he's like this serial killer wearing like mime face paint, and just a cold killer. And so to change him up, and to make him like one of the leading members of the tracksuit mafia, I think was an
Yeah.
interesting turn, because he's not really the same character, that he is in the comics. And in the comics, there's no relationship between him and Maya. So I'm not sure if the writers like were fully, on board. I felt like there are a lot of kind of ideas,
Yeah.
uh, at
But
work
not
there.
fleshed out very well.
Yeah, I think that,
Yeah.
there was definitely some things that they could have gone back and reworked, because I'm not opposed to, the idea of this romantic relationship between the two, and her kind of joining this life that he's always been a part of. But I just wish that had kind of been established earlier.
Yeah, I do think there's missing gaps there. If you're not familiar with the character going in, and I, like me, and I wasn't completely familiar with him in the comics, I just feel like we don't learn much about him.
Yeah.
And what we do learn about him is very little. I don't know how much of it impacts Maya's story at all. I do like the writing of that character of Maya. I think it's well acted. And there's some very good emotion there. And the relationship between them is endearing enough because we're mostly viewing it from Maya's perspective. I just don't know how much we learn about him. And then you kind of shoehorn this conflict in at the very end, maybe some romanticism there, but it certainly isn't enough. And so to me, that is the biggest weakness of the show for sure. But I do like Maya. I'm curious to see more of that character, and we're definitely going to get more of her coming soon. So I'm very much intrigued there. Let's get to the big cameo. Yeah. So spoilers, if you haven't seen Hawkeye, big spoilers here. So Kingpin comes back into the MCU. Vincent D'Onofrio reprising his role as the Kingpin from the Daredevil Netflix series. And as you noted earlier, you got to love the timing, right? Because the episode where they reveal him was the same weekend we saw Charlie Cox's Daredevil and Spider-Man. Yeah. Wow, what a coincidence that was. So we're getting at least Daredevil and the Kingpin from the Netflix Marvel shows. They're coming into the MCU officially.
Yep.
For the first time. We'll see if anyone else joins the four-way here. But what did you think about Kingpin coming back? Very fun, right?
I thought it was awesome. I love what Vincent D'Onofrio
he's great.
did with the character in Daredevil. I loved how he continued it here. He talked about, there were some questions about the continuity in terms of the Netflix stuff because it wasn't developed by Marvel Studios. That was Marvel Television. And D'Onofrio said that he played it as a continuation of that character who, because of the blip, has kind of lost his standing. He got out of prison, but he's rebuilding his empire from scratch. I'd have to rewatch the last season of Daredevil a little bit to see how that tracks. But I did think that was interesting that he is approaching it as the same character. Despite the fact that there's some physical differences, I think, in terms of how strong he is. He gets hit by a car, gets like explosive arrow. He's very
arrow to the chest, like just.
He's very durable, which is how he is in the comics. But it's just interesting to go from like the more grounded, this is a regular like human guy. He's really strong, but he's a human guy in Daredevil to, I don't know, maybe there's some like underlying like meta-human abilities or something. But the thing that I've always loved about D'Onofrio's performance is that, there is such this like frustrated little boy aspect to him, which, he's someone who very much, wants to have things his way. And when he doesn't, like, you can just see the kind of like, onset of a tantrum starting, the watering of the eyes and like the twitching of the nose. Like, I love that he's like always just like on the verge of just having a full blown meltdown.
Oh, I have a 5-year-old. I understand completely what that's like. And that's exactly what he is. He's a toddler. When he starts to not get his way, it's like, okay, we're going to cry about it. And we're going to throw a tantrum. The big difference is he's huge and powerful. And instead of throwing toys across the room, he's just going to kill you.
Yeah.
So, that certainly makes him formidable for sure. You don't want to mess with them. I do think the performance is awfully similar. So I in terms of continuity as a continuation, I can certainly understand that they do kind of heighten him physically as you're talking about. Anytime you get hit by a car like that and survive. I can't get over the fact that he just took an explosion to the face and no ramifications whatsoever. And again, same weekend where that happens to Aunt May, and spoilers, no good. So I don't know. Maybe there's credence to the theories that maybe he has a little bit of that Captain America thing in him, a little bit of the serum. I've read some of that, so. Who knows? Maybe we'll get an explanation because, I love Vincent D'Onofrio, but him in an interview isn't official canon.
For
We
sure.
have to wait for Marvel to give that to us.
For sure.
And I assume we're going to get that. So the final shot of the series with him, Maya gets his revenge, points the gun, we hear the blast, but we don't see it. We don't see him get shot. In the comics, when that happens, he's blinded.
He is.
So I'm assuming that's where we're going.
I think that's where we're going. He says, his final words is families don't always see eye to eye, and then you get
that line
two
too.
blasts. So I definitely think that we're going to see a blinded Kingpin, which will be really interesting. And I feel like D'Onofrio is an actor who loves to do something, a bit different every time with his performances.
Yes.
I think, previously it said that he had made peace with, the role of Kingpin being over after Daredevil. But I think that, now he gets to kind of play with it in a new way, as a blind Kingpin, and kind of, do something different as an actor, which is one of the reasons why I love him as an actor. Like, I feel like he really goes all in on the transformations and kind of figuring out the subtleties of that.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm really excited to see what he does going forward. But yeah, I definitely, there was a lot of panic on Twitter after that last episode of people saying, "I can't believe they killed off the Kingpin," and I'm like, "No, they didn't do that. Like, he's definitely still alive."
Yeah, because if you're not aware of the comic parallels, I can absolutely understand that feeling of, "Oh, he's back. Oh, he's gone." That would be disappointing for sure. Yeah. So I do understand that. But yeah, we're definitely going to get more of I just can't fathom that Marvel would be like, "We're going to bring this character back. Watch him. He's great, right? Isn't this fun?" Nope, he's gone. And just like that, he's gone. They wouldn't do that. I mean, they've done some great sidestepping before. They've what's the word? They've certainly repealed some expectations with other films and whatnot before, but I don't think they would do that after all this buildup and whatnot. But yeah, so I'm excited. And even in this series, speaking to D'Onofrio's performance and just kind of what he's doing with it, even in this, even though he's channeling a lot of the same mannerisms and that kind of forceful intimidation we saw in the Daredevil series, I do think in this he's doing a lot of that, but I also think it's also heightened in a bit, in a way that I think is more tonally appropriate, because obviously things get a lot more gruesome,
right,
and violent in Daredevil.
Yeah,
and we're not gonna have that in the MCU and in these TV shows. So I think he does a great job of still having that brooding aesthetic and vibe, but also being a little bit more aware of, this isn't going to be violent and gruesome. This is going to be heightened and be a little bit more fun. I think he plays that up very well. And now you add in the fact that he's blind, no more eyes. Now he can heighten that even further if he wants. So I'm curious to see how he tiptoes that, but as you stated, he's a great actor. He's certainly going to make that work for sure.
Yeah, but it's definitely interesting to see like his fight against Kate, and it's much more comic booky. He says like you're becoming an annoyance, and it's like, I mean, like, if this is the same character from Daredevil, I mean, like, he like crushed a dude's head in a car door for like being embarrassed in front of this like girl that he liked, and I'm like, he definitely would have like crippled Kate Bishop, like if this was the same
for
series.
Sure. Exactly. Yeah.
So there's definitely like some like calibration in terms of the performance.
Yeah. So that is to say, I'm very excited to see where they go with it. I assume that at some point Charlie Cox's Daredevil will come into the mix, maybe Spider-Man as well. Now that they have some room to play with that character. So yeah, should be really fun. I'm curious as we start to kind of wind down here. I do want to. There are two questions. I want to kind of get your overall idea, vision for where you think things are going in the MCU after the events of this, which we've talked about a little bit, but I want to hear more. But specifically, I want to start that off with Hawkeye, Clint Barton himself. So the final scene, or one of the final scenes of this, seems to indicate that Kate Bishop will now take up the mantle of Hawkeye. Is this a farewell to Clint? Will he come back into the fold, or do you think he's now retired?
Originally when the series was announced, I thought for sure that this would be like an official passing of the torch. Jeremy Renner's out of it. But like part of the fun of the comics is the fact that you have these two Hawkeyes who have very different approaches, and I
Mm-hmm.
just think that given the way it ends, and him getting the new costume and him getting rid of this burden as Ronin and finding this new, partner in Kate Bishop, I would not be surprised if we do see another season with both of them and that,
Oh, okay.
Clint continues. And I also think that, Kate has more to learn,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of being a superhero. So I think there may be like an official passing of the torch eventually of Clint Barton retiring and, finally going back to his family full time. But I
Yeah.
think that, because of the stakes of the show, are fun, and it's not, I don't think that we're there's danger, but it's
Yeah.
definitely not going to be like, Clint Barton is gonna die. I think it's a little, looser and
Yeah.
more playful
Yeah.
than that. So I do think like because of that, we're going to continue to kind of see them together in the MCU for a little bit.
Oh, for sure. Now, again, I would argue that Marvel's done a pretty good job of injecting these films, these TV shows with great emotion that is attainable. I again, similar to what we were talking about a moment ago with D'Onofrio and just kind of teasing him and then pulling him away. I don't think Marvel will kill off a character after we kind of get to know his family and
Yeah,
they build
that's
him
what I
up
thought
as a
too.
family man to
Yeah,
then be like, and now he's dead.
yeah.
Like, I can't fathom that's where they're gonna go. Although, I'm all for bold risk. So if that's
I
what they want to
think
do, then
I think with Whedon out of the picture, I think that Clint is safe. I think that before
yeah,
I think that there's a possibility that he would have died if he had stayed on longer in the MCU. But
we
I
with
do
Wade,
think
yeah,
yeah, but I
yeah,
do think that that we've gotten to know his family a lot over the course of the series. And I just feel like after having already like lost their aunt Nat, I think that
yeah, exactly.
to
They've
to
been through
lose
enough.
Clint.
Those kids.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think that they're gonna do that.
Yeah, I don't think they are either. And I almost would have guessed that maybe this could have been a passing of the torch because that little jab he has there at the end of, oh, I think I have a name for you. That's a fun little transition there. But the one thing that gives me pause regarding Renner is that he gives his wife that damn watch
Yeah,
to reveal to us that she was a shield agent at one point. Not that I expect her to come into the fold and become an agent again or anything. I don't think that's going to happen necessarily. But it makes me wonder if there's more stories to be told that she's subtly involved with Renner's Hawkeye as he goes out and does his little things.
yeah.
I wonder if there's more to the reveal than just a fun little Easter egg of, oh, she used to be a shield agent. And if that's all that it is, then that's great. I'm perfectly fine with that too. I just wonder, and that's what gives me pause on the whole: is Renner done or not?
And I think just to add to that, and it's not just the Shield logo; it's Agent 19, which is very
Yeah,
specific. For comic book fans, like that was Mockingbird's code name, who was married to Clint in the comics. And so I think
yeah,
that the fact that they're specifying her relation to that character
yeah.
makes
Great
me
point.
think
Yeah,
that we're gonna see more of her. And I did read recently, the writers were kind of talking about how they hope to see Linda Cardellini do something more in the MCU so that it's not just like her being at home with the kids. That's not her entire
which is
life.
mostly what we've seen. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, we've never seen her like out of the Barton property. Uh, and so they did say that they're hoping to kind of tee that up with that reveal. So yeah, I definitely think that even if she's not a full-time regular, I do think that we might see her get in on the action, a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, because even like the way she's interjected into this series, I think is honestly kind of fun. There, like those little reveals along the way were very surprising. Like when she starts speaking in Russian or whatever that language was, or just the little kind of mystery teases that she has that Hawkeye is clearly in tune with, but we as the audience are not. Like there's something going on here. Like what is this?
A True Lies thing, with them. That'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, exactly. I think that would be interesting. So like even if they do more of that and expand on that a little bit more, even if she's not fully involved, immersed in it as like another character fighting in, wherever Renner is. But just to have her more involved, I think would be interesting. And now that they've revealed it so specifically as you're talking about, it does make me wonder if there's going to be more there with Hawkeye, with Renner's Hawkeye specifically. So that's why I was real curious to hear what you thought regarding the future of the MCU, because I don't know if he's done necessarily. So I'm curious about that. Let's also transition to the MCU broader, given the events of this, where we're going to go forward. And also I think we can bring in the events of Spider-Man, because that could intertingle with some of this as well.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen next in the MCU?
So, I've heard some interesting rumors about the Echo series, which is Maya Lopez's series. And I've heard that, some of the Daredevil characters beyond, I mean, Kingpin will obviously be a part of it because he's so tied to her origin. But I've also heard that we will see, Matt Murdock return in that as well. So that should be fun.
Yeah, I can't wait.
I also think that, with Kate, they are building, this group of, younger heroes.
The Young Avengers.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily sure if they'll do the Young Avengers, name, because I think Kate says she's like 23 or something in the series. So she's not exactly like a teenager, kind of like the Young Avengers were. But she did lead a team in the comics called West Coast Avengers. And she settled in San Francisco, and got her own team of kind of younger heroes there. And I know that we're getting reintroduced to Cassie Lang in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, who becomes the superhero Stature. And we met Eli Bradley and Falcon and Winter Soldier. So we met Billy and Tommy in WandaVision.
Yeah, I was gonna say the kids in WandaVision.
Yeah, so we are meeting
that can't be a coincidence, right?
Right. That core group of Young Avengers have all been introduced, within this phase 4. I think we're just missing Hulkling, and then there's a young version of Kang, who's a part of that original team as well.
Okay.
So I definitely think that we're heading in that direction. Whether they'll be called the Young Avengers or not remains to be seen. But I definitely think that Marvel is building something with those characters. Yeah.
I don't know if Marvel has any power over the IMDb description for this show or not, but for what it's worth, it does say here that the series is based on Hawkeye and centering on the adventures of young Avenger Kate Bishop, who took on the role after the original Avenger Clint Barton. So I'm just saying, I'm just throwing that out there. That's what IMDb says right here, young Avenger, quote unquote. You can quote unquote me. If Marvel wrote that, I'm just saying that maybe that's where we're headed. Is that either way though? I think you're wholeheartedly right, because they've introduced all these characters. There's no way that's a coincidence. As we've talked about, they don't do this stuff lightly.
Yeah.
They don't put Kingpin as a cameo, and then 2 days later we see Daredevil in Spider-Man No Way Home.
Yeah.
So like, we know that they're doing all of this on purpose. So that is certainly coming down
And
the pipeline
I mean, just
very
the,
soon.
the fascinating thing about that is that, it was revealed recently that Charlie Cox knew that he was going to be in Spider-Man like 3 years ago. So like they really have this stuff planned out, so like all
How
this
do you keep
time,
that secret for
yeah,
3 years?
yeah, all this time, he's been discussing like, oh, I'd love to go back. I haven't heard anything. It's a real bummer. I love the character, and
3
he's known
years.
the entire time.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting. So that means that they have plans for that character then.
Yeah.
So he's certainly coming back. I do wonder, since a lot of this takes place in New York, and as we just talked about, I don't think Clint is done. And I do think he's going to come back. So with all of this taking place in New York, and Spider-Man now having a little bit of freedom, even if we just stick to that specifically, you got to think that something's coming soon that involves Spider-Man and Daredevil and Kingpin, and maybe Kate and Clint as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think that, the next, I mean, I know that Tom Holland's been kind of on the fence a little bit about it publicly in terms of interviews, but I mean, he's got to be coming back.
He knows.
I mean, that setup is too perfect, the classic Spider-Man.
Yeah.
But I definitely think the fact that we see, Matt Murdock in No Way Home, I think it's definitely setting up for a Daredevil Spider-Man team up against kind of the New York City's underworld, because I mean that is something that we've never seen in a Spider-Man film before. It's also kind of, Holland had said if they did continue, it would be a more mature take. And I mean, what's more mature than like Spider-Man going up against like the mob? Alongside Daredevil.
With Daredevil? Oh my gosh. Give me that, please.
Yeah. So I definitely think that we're gonna see a lot more of that. Echo's involvement, and Clinton Cates as well. So I think that Marvel is really building up a really interesting, I guess, kind of like urban, superhero, collective, to kind of go alongside with their, more cosmic heroes and the bigger superheroes. I like this kind of street level approach that they're taking. Yeah.
I completely agree. That's exactly what I was going to say. It is the perfect juxtaposition to what we're about to get with opening up the freaking multi-universe stuff.
Yeah.
And not only that, but we're eventually going to get more of the space cosmic stuff with Thor and the Guardians. All that sort of stuff is coming out soon as well. So, I mean, having something kind of more down the road, so to speak, I think would be a nice little way to bring great variety to the MCU.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly ready for that. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I can't wait for the next Thor movie. It's probably going to be a ton of fun, and it's going to be wild. And everything that we have, going with Doctor Strange, that's going to be wild as well. I can't wait for all that, but keeping it down in the streets with Daredevil and Spider-Man, and taking down the crooks that just robbed that store over there.
Yeah,
give it to me. I definitely want it.
I need Feige to give Kristen Ritter a call too for Jessica Jones. I need to see her in the mix as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, I cannot wait to see what all is coming down the pipeline very soon. But they've certainly set the table very, very well, and I cannot wait. So, all right, as we wrap things up here, any final thoughts on anything, Richard, before we start to say goodbye?
I do want to just mention the Yelena thread real quick in terms of Val and that post-credit scene in Black Widow. I was expecting her to kind of show up and get an idea of kind of what she had planned. I assume that Kate's mom, Vera Farmiga's character, I assume that's who she called to kind of alert her that Clint was around in New York, and that's how Yelena got the assignment. But I'm very curious because I think of all the characters, we don't really get a clear sense of direction of what's next for her, and yet we know that Val has reached out to her and John Walker, U.S. agents. So I'm very interested to kind of
Yeah.
see where they show up because of Marvel's projects coming up next year. The Disney Plus series. We have Moon Knight. We have She-Hulk. We
Oh my
have
gosh, I forgot about Moon. How did I forget
yeah.
about Moon Knight?
We have
Ethan
Miss
Hawke
Marvel
and oh my,
and Secret Invasion, and so like none of
yeah,
those necessarily suggest the presence of Yelena. So I'm very kind of interested to see where she'll show up
yeah.
next. Yeah.
Man, I was so caught up with Spider-Man and Daredevil. I forgot about that we're getting some of those next year as
Yeah.
well. So yeah, Pandora's box is just continuing to open up more and more. So that is very exciting. Yeah, I can't wait to see where all of that goes forward. So yeah, that is a really great point. Man, as far as final thoughts, I don't know if I have any at this point. I think we've talked, quite a bit here about why I like the show anyway. And I mean, really, if I had to boil everything down, I just like that we get to see Clint kind of soak in his survivor's guilt and
Yeah.
him wrestle with Natasha's death again, like more directly. You see a little bit of it at the end of Endgame, but I understand the criticisms there that maybe it wasn't enough. And similar to Wanda with WandaVision, getting to see her deal with that in a very adamant way there, and then to see Clint kind of wrestle with that here. That was really the beating heart of this whole thing for me. And Kate was fun, and Kingpin was fun. All that was lovely as well. The LARPers, we didn't even
Yeah.
mention them. That was a fun little gag throughout all
Yeah.
of this as well. They were a fun little thing. So, but emotionally speaking, that's where I found it very satisfying. And Renner is just so good. So good in this. Oh my gosh. I think selfishly, I want Clint to come back just because I want to see more of Renner as this character. So
It finally feels like he's like getting his chance to shine as the character.
yeah,
He's always had the chops to do it. I just feel like, they've never really put him front and center.
yeah.
So I mean,
And now and maybe that's another incentive for Renner to stay and continue this character, because now perhaps they'll put him in more, whether it be a show or a movie where he'll get to be a part of the lead.
right.
Like even if he's not the lead, maybe he's a co-lead and he's very much involved. So we'll get to see him kind of chew on some more stuff with that character. So yeah, going forward, I'm all for it. So I'm very excited. Thanks again, Richard, for being here. Always love having you here. You write for the Hollywood Reporter, so tell us about it. Where can we find you on social media?
Yeah, I'm on social media at Richard L. Newby. That's on Twitter. And then Hollywood Reporter, you can just type in my name in the search bar and all my articles will come up. I covered Hawkeye weekly, covered all the Marvel shows weekly this year. And then I'm looking forward to continuing to do that next year. There's a lot of exciting stuff coming down the pipeline. I'm sure I'll definitely be back for another live show whenever the next one hits. So looking forward to that. I'm doing my Moon Knight research now, so
I'm gonna have to join you in that because I honestly don't know much about that character, and that was actually part of the intrigue when I first heard about it. And then they cast Oscar Isaac, my boy.
Yeah,
I love me some Oscar Isaac and Ethan Hawke. They put those two together. Are you kidding me?
it's gonna be
In a
something
Marvel
special.
thing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. If that doesn't end up being my favorite Marvel thing they've done yet, they done screwed up. I just can't fathom how it won't be. So yeah, I'm gonna have to do the research as well. I gotta learn more about that character. My God, that's gonna be exciting.
For sure.
But yeah, we would definitely love to have you back for all of this next year as well. Always appreciate you coming on. Please give Richard a follow if you don't already. Really, really great guy. Great follow. His work at the Hollywood Reporter is phenomenal. With a capital P, it is incredible stuff. Really do appreciate you. Thanks for those who watched on YouTube live or after we wrap up here. The audio to this is on our podcast feed as well. So if you listen to it via audio on the podcast feed, thanks for tuning in for this as well. And we will see you all next time whenever the next Marvel show drops, probably sometime in February. I don't know. I don't have the schedule in front of me, but whenever it happens, we'll be back to talk about it. Thanks, Richard, again. Thanks for listening, everybody. We will see you all next time on the In Session Film YouTube live stream.